Welcome to Inflection Point Podcast, where we cultivate change from the inside out as we ponder the Cairo question. Will Cairo have to protest in his lifetime for the birthright to freely and peacefully exist in the skin in which he was born? We stand on the belief that dismantling racism goes beyond laws and legislation or politics and economics. Here, anti-racism activation is presented as an inside job where personal transformation and accountability impact social change. So take a seat at the anti-racism activation table with Inflection Point Podcast.
Well, hello there, and thank you for joining us for the newest episode of Inflection Point Podcast, where we are dedicated to the art of listening in authentic conversation. We challenge our audience to listen actively and intentionally for the purpose of self-awareness, understanding, personal transformation, and ultimately social impact. I'm your host, Anita Russell, and here's a quick hello from co-hosts Mavis and Gail.
Hello, I'm Mavis Bauman.
Hello, I'm Gail Hunter, and welcome to this evening's program.
Excellent, excellent. So if you've been following us, you know that we've been doing this ongoing series on the Sankofa Generational Leadership Continuum. And we will continue that theme in this conversation, where the focus is specifically on anti-racism and family engagement and generational leadership. And we're very fortunate to have a very special guest with us. But before we jump into that, I want to just give you a quick overview of what the Sankofa Leadership Continuum is all about. It is a through line running from historical leaders of the past to contemporary leaders of the present to those who will emerge as future leaders. Melding together historical and contemporary reality, this through line inspires resistance, activism, art, literature, ethnography, and research to fuel transformation. Our guest today is actually the son of Gail Hunter. So I'm very happy to have him on. So I'm going to go through a quick bio. And we're actually taking a different approach to our generational leadership conversation in this episode. Our guest is Dave Daqualente. And as I mentioned, he is the son of Gail Hunter. Dave was born and raised in the Pittsburgh region and has lived here for nearly his entire life. His family is the driving source of motivation in his life. He is happily married to his high school sweetheart. They have 3 healthy, active young sons. Dave's professional aspirations were not set in stone from an early age, but he always knew he wanted to be a father and a husband. He was fortunate to find an industry that he is passionate about and has worked in different direct and indirect roles within the construction industry for the past 20 plus years. Dave believes that together we accomplish more. When we are building relationships, building people up, or building award-winning buildings and infrastructure projects in our region. He's a proud graduate of the Pennsylvania State University of Pittsburgh's Entrepreneurial Fellowship class, and Leadership Pittsburgh. And the best thing, as I mentioned earlier, is that he is Gail's son. And we wanted to talk with him about growing up with a mom who was an anti-racist even before it was activated as widely as it is now. So that's a very strong testimony to who Gail is as a person and as a generational leader. So welcome, Dave.
Thank you very much, Anita,
Thank you,
Davis,
Dave.
Mom.
Have
It's
you?
great to be with you
Yes.
tonight.
Excellent, excellent. So let's just kind of jump right into the conversation. We had a chance to meet with Dave in our typical meet and greet, just to kind of get some background information. So I came up with a few questions to kind of discuss in today's conversation. So the first segment, growing up in an anti-racist environment. How would you describe your mother?
That's an awfully big question for a short form program. So I would describe my mother as a caretaker, a caregiver. She's someone who, even to this day, I describe as being incredibly proud of the work that she continues to do and the thousands and thousands of lives that she's positively impacted. So it's a great honor to have grown up with her and continue to have her in my life.
Excellent. So Mavis and I were talking earlier today, and we realized that there's a strong comparison, if you will, between Gail and Joan Trumpauer Mulholland, who was a civil rights activist, and she was one of the people sitting at the lunch counters in the 60s. And this is a white woman who decided that she wanted to go to an HBCU instead of a more predominantly white university and all of that. So when I was earlier, I want to say maybe this year and last year, I was learning more about Joan. And I came to realize when Mavis and I were talking earlier, I came to realize that Gail is another person very similar to Joan Trumpauer Mulholland, who ended up getting involved in civil rights activities at a very young age. When I say young age, I mean like in their teenage years, going into college and all of that. And so when I think about Joan Trumpauer Mulholland, I actually had the opportunity to meet and talk to her son, Loki Mulholland, who is an anti-racist today, and he's also a film producer. And I was just kind of came to that understanding that Gail, to me, is in the same category as Joan Trumpauer Mulholland. So that's why it's very befitting, I think, and interesting to kind of be able to have this conversation with you, Dave, to help us to dig a little bit deeper into who Gail actually is. And so you talked about how you would describe your mother. So let's take that a little bit further. And can you tell us how you would describe your childhood experience in being raised by such a woman as your mother?
Sure. Yeah, I'm unfamiliar with the woman Joan that you referenced, but it gives me another thing to look up and do a little bit of research on, and I'm sure it's a very kind comparison to the work that my mother has done and who she is. I would say my childhood was human-centered. It was focused on feelings and not just being in touch with yours, and that emotions are okay and that they're a good part of the human experience, and it's important to be aware of others' feelings and emotions, but at the same time knowing that you can only control the things that you can control, right? You can't try to impart what your wishes or plans or desires are on another person just because they're yours. And so I think that's something that I think has been with me since I was a child, that emotions are okay, and it's good to feel those things and be able to talk about them, whether in the moment you want to talk about them or whenever you're comfortable and available to talk about them. But I think that's a driving component, I think, of how I was raised and who I am. I'll say on the other end of it too, when you get in trouble as a child, different parents and different families have different ways they go about that discipline. And for me, it was always, my mom's a therapist, so we talk about our feelings, we talk about what happened, we talk about it. And when you're certainly 9, 10, or into the teenage years, you don't always really want to talk about those things, but it's helped me, certainly.
Excellent. So Gail, what is your response to the comparison that I just did to you and Joan Trumpauer Mulholland?
Well, I'm honored. First of all, thank you. I hadn't thought about that, and I can see parts of why you you were thinking about that also. I certainly have been actively anti-racist before, as you said. It was even a term, but most of all, living more authentically and just honestly and openly to myself and to others, and just always wanting to, as they said, be in service to others, or provide the ability for others to transform their own lives. And I'm just grateful that I've been able to do that in my own career and my life personally. It's been a gift to me too, not just to others.
To just interject, Anita was talking about how Joan Trumpauer Mulholland had a precipitating experience that caused her to change the course of her life. Like, she decided to go to a smaller college in Mississippi and really face the issues. And it reminded us of how you just decided to go to a Black Panther meeting, how those were precipitating events. And even, when as you've told the story about the cross burning on a yard in your area, the reactions, the way you formed your lives has a parallel path.
Yes, I can see that. Because it was clearly formative for me, both. And when I went to the Black Panther meeting in college, I can remember friends of mine saying, "Why are you doing that for? Why are you going? You shouldn't do that." And it didn't make sense to me. Why not? They're working with kids. They're doing. I was in child development, so of course I was going to go and see what I could do to help. It didn't even cross my mind at that time. And then when I moved to an area in the suburbs of Pittsburgh back in the '60s, mid '60s, and they burned a cross on a Black family's front yard. When then they moved into the very expensive neighborhood, and nobody was feeling what I was feeling. I was appalled. I was shocked.
I remember you telling me that story.
Yeah.
Actually, I hadn't thought about that until right now, but I do remember you telling me that story.
Yeah.
So what impact did that have on you, and how old were you when she told you that story, and what impact did it have on you?
Yeah, it's a good question. If my recall serves, it was around the time where, educationally, I don't remember the grade or the age, we were learning about the civil rights movement. And as I mentioned in our earlier discussion, we grew up in an area that at the time, my school district was the most socioeconomically diverse school district in the state of Pennsylvania. But it wasn't extremely racially diverse. There were certainly non-white individuals and families in the community, but not as much as maybe the socioeconomic status. And so I didn't have a lot of firsthand experience like that, or what I was reading and learning. And so I do remember my mom talking to me about that and what her experiences were. And, her, again, as I mentioned earlier, just that thought that, to be of service to others, to connect with other human beings, the clothes we wear, the way our hair is, the tone of our skin, it's not what makes the person. The person is who they are and how they act, how they treat other people. And I hadn't thought about that probably in 25 years. So
That's very cool. So can you recall a point in your life as you were getting older when you realized that there was something different about the way your mother was raising you up compared perhaps to other people that you were surrounded by?
Anita, do you mean in the racial context or just in general?
Well, just in general, but definitely in the racial context. Just the way you mentioned how your mom dealt with whenever you did something wrong and needed to be punished or whatever, that she took a very different approach. So what I'm asking is, was there a point in your life when you began to realize that there was something different about the way your mother was raising you up versus perhaps some of your peers?
And you can be honest.
Yes, please be honest.
No, of course. Yeah, no reason to not be. The opposite side to the discipline, or and certainly the things that I was disciplined for or did to warrant those discussions. I absolutely knew in the moment, and I know now looking back, those discussions needed to happen. Those disciplinary actions needed to happen, right? There was a behavioral change and approach that needed to be adjusted, and that's what pushing boundaries is like, right? Whatever the age is and whatever the developmental period you're in. On the positive end, as opposed to disciplinary being negative, I would say I had a friend in middle school who was living, had a very different childhood than I did. Who was a single parent, grandparent was living there, a single father was raising him, mother wasn't in the picture. Just a very different experience than what I had had, even though my parents had been divorced and for a time was a single mother, and I did have a stepfather in my life at the time. But this new friend, would come and be capable of staying with us for days on end, right? Without any concern. There was a check-in, with dad, but he was working, and I think it was a night shift, or I think he was a machinist. And it wasn't a concern of after a few days, hey, this kid needs to go home. He was welcome as long as he was okay and his family to be there. And there was never an expectation of, he's eating us out of house and home along with you as a, preteen or teenage boy, right? It was just a very, very welcoming home environment. Again, whether that was for an afternoon or whether that was for an extended period of time. And while I think many of my friends' parents would probably have done the same, there was just something different about the focus and the care that she gave to my friend, who was a newer friend at the time. That was no different than the care, attention, or love that she was giving to her children.
Do you remember that incident, Gail?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I remember him. I don't remember exactly how he stayed for a while, and he was always welcoming.
Yeah, it wasn't a month at a time or anything like that, but it would be more than just a overnight, right? And there was nothing wrong at home per se with him at all, really. His father was providing for him, and it was a good home environment. It was just different. And so knowing that if I had wanted to go over to a friend's house for 4 days at a time, come back again 3 days later, it certainly would have been permitted, but it wasn't something that was something I even looked to do, I guess.
Right. And I always seem to have a lot of kids coming to my house, and I welcomed them. I always loved that. So that was a common thing, I think.
Gail is still doing that.
I still do that.
Even with older friends.
I know,
with older
right.
friends.
Yeah, we were going to stop by one Saturday, and she said, well, Anita and Mavis, I think, are going to be here at different times of coming. And I was like, well, I don't want to, disrupt the flow and the fun and everything else. So no, it's wonderful.
Not possible. She just
keeps said, well, you can still come. It's okay.
Yeah, that was good times.
Yeah.
So when we did our meet and greet the other day, you mentioned Tupac Shakur. And I wanted to go back to that because if I recall correctly, what you specifically said was that you started listening to Tupac because you wanted to learn. So can you talk to me about what that was all about for you?
Sure. Yeah, I have always had, I guess, a wide range and interest and appreciation for music. I don't have a musical talented bone in my body, but I appreciate music and the way it can make you feel or evoke feelings, ties to memories and that sort of recall of, boy, the leaves start to drop and you hear this one song on the radio and it takes you back to you're 12 years old or whatever the case may be, right? So I enjoy music, and I remember in 5th grade, somebody brought in a Snoop Dogg, his Snoop Dogg's first CD album. Too young to be listening to it. It absolutely had the parental warning on it, right? Would listen to it kind of under wraps, and that got me turned on to rap music or hip hop a little bit more. And so then just started to kind of explore a little bit. And I think the context of the conversation the other day was around Black Panthers and my mom's experience going to that. And the first time I had heard or learned about the Black Panthers was was through understanding a little bit more of Tupac's story and his mother, and how he had been raised, what that environment was like, her life and her story a little bit. And so, yeah, it was a part of that interest that I had in learning about history, American history, or world history, and cultural history as well. I think it's probably a reason why I took a class in college and undergrad that was nothing but a deep dive exploration of the lyrics of the day the music died. And so it's that element of learning cultural history, facts, figures, etc., but through that lens of music and lyrics and writing, poetry, whatever the case may be.
So what was the most significant thing that you learned from all of that?
Boy, you're great at asking really full loaded questions. What is the most significant thing I learned from specifically thinking about that? Tupac and most significant thing. I think it was probably a reinforcement of knowing that everybody has a different story, and though you think everything in your world and your 4 square miles around your house and your school and your life or your job, there's so much going on, and it can weigh so much on you as a kid or a teenager or an adult. But everybody's experiencing that, right, across the country, in our country, or across the world, certainly. And there's just so much more than just what's happening inside the, I'll say, box, right? We live in a little bit of a virtual world now, right? But there's so much more that happens in everybody else's little box, their corner of the world, that it's good to be open to that.
It's actually beautiful to hear you make that type of statement, because so much of what we have been doing in doing and having this podcast has been around lived experiences and shared narratives and things like that, and actually challenging people to kind of get to a place where they realize that they don't know what they don't know. So until you're ready to really open up your own thoughts, open up your own mind, and really begin to explore what is it that lies within you on the one hand, but then also being willing and able to kind of step out of that frame of reference and take a more perspective-taking view of life, where you're literally allowing yourself to see life through somebody else's lens, or somebody else's story, or somebody else's lived experiences and everything. So I really appreciate the way you just broke that down and described it. Gail, Mavis, any comments?
I just wondered if, Dave, did you like Tupac's music? And did you understand the words? How did the words have a lot of meaning for you?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And it Anita, when you were just sort of assessing what I had said, it made me think maybe it's just about the words. And you said opening yourself up to other people's shared experiences or their experiences through their lens. And I think that's a really important way to phrase it, because you're not going to experience that. You're not going to have that deep-seated understanding. You're going to have to the best that you can, try to understand it through their willingness to share, their lens. And in that particular case, it's through lyrics, it's through music, it's what they can convey about their story or poetry. Slam poetry was kind of becoming a bigger thing when I was an undergrad, and so the same type of lyrical delivery of that emotion and experience. So I think it was, I did connect with it, not because I had those same experiences in many cases, but the core theme of identifying who you are, identifying if you're, are you on the right path to being the man in the family or the man in your own life, and what that means in a community sense. Those are things that I think to a degree I was considering and exploring and thinking about a lot. And so certainly not the same experience at all to what he had lived at the time or what he was writing about or those experiences. But there are common themes that I think they'll resonate with you.
Right. I I just I have to kid myself about listening to the music because I love the rap music itself. And I memorized some of the songs, but I did not know what I was saying. I didn't know how to put those words into the context of like Tupac's life or any other rapper. So that's where my question was coming from. And one of our colleagues, Kyle Williams from a long talk, told me, he said, well, you weren't meant to understand the words. You know, they were written, you know, for the Black community, for the young people to express how they were feeling. And I had no relationship with their lived experiences. So I was just wondering how that was for you in comparison.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I connect with the lyrics, but I think generally speaking, when I listen to music, I connect mostly with the music, the melody, the harmony, the beats, whether it's Led Zeppelin or whether it's, you know, Tupac or Biggie. I really feel the music, I think. Whereas I know my wife and my son, my one son, the lyrics are the key, right? He's now 7, but he was 4 years old and he was listening to the lyrics in the car and then he would start to sing. And so lyrically, I absolutely connect. But I think it's the music element of it that there's not that differing lens to be able to have those shared experiences as you're talking about, or understand the language and, you know, maybe who the target audience was to share that with. So maybe I had that as an advantage to connect with it.
Well, music is almost a universal language itself, right? That we all can relate to. And I have to say that you actually were really good at rapping when you were young. I mean, like 8, 9, 10 years old, young. And because I drove them around everywhere, and that became very popular, I also got to experience a lot of the rap music. But I think the words, I do understand that you actually could relate to the themes that were coming through in some of that music and identify with that, given different things that happened in your life.
Right. So we're going to take a break at this point and we'll come back and resume this conversation in just a minute or so. So welcome back to Inflection Point Podcast and our discussion of the power of generational leadership, featuring Dave Daqualente, son of co-host Gail Hunter. So we were just kind of engaging in this conversation about music. We had started talking about Dave's interest in rap music, specifically some of the things that he learned from Tupac Shakur, which I think is just pretty amazing. During the break, we had a little bit of conversation, and I'd like to kind of bring that into the forefront of the conversation here. Is Dave, if you could talk about some of because clearly there's an influence on you, right? You're a white guy and you listen to Tupac, and you've not just listened but learned from Tupac. So, are there times when you may encounter some of your counterparts, other white men, as an example, who kind of wonder, like, what are you doing? Why are you listening to this? Or like, does that sort of show up for you in those types of circles as well?
Yeah, so the best example of that, I think I'd have to go back a while and describe, I guess my college experience when I would be, you know, making new friends and engaging now, because for the most part, if I'm in the car now, I'm either on a work call or, you know, I'm listening to sports radio or you know, occasionally I get to have a long enough drive where I can listen to some music. So I definitely experienced what you described probably my freshman year of college, right? Again, I mentioned earlier in the conversation, wide range of musical interests and appreciation, from, you know, acoustic singer-songwriters to Led Zeppelin, Beastie Boys, you know, Tupac, Biggie, even, you know, pop music, and probably enjoyed some boy band stuff in the late 90s and early 2000s. So that sort of eclectic appreciation for music meant if I had a mixed tape or a mixed CD or something in the car and people were in there and maybe they were more interested or listened to punk music or rock music, whatever, and, you know, I'd have a track from Stephen Kellogg and the Sixers or Matt Nathanson, and then it would be a a Tupac track, right? Or, Beastie Boys, right? So it would just vary. And for me, that was just my interest. It didn't necessarily have a flow to it. It didn't have a meaning, a purpose, a message behind it. It was what was appealing to me. And it wasn't as appealing to some of my friends who happen to be white. They didn't judge me for it, I think, other than the, sort of busting on each other a little bit. They don't like this song. I don't like that song. I don't get it. I can't understand some of the fast punk lyrics because they're just so quick and hard hitting, in the same way that somebody might not be able to understand some of the fast cadence of a rap song, right? So there's this preference, and I didn't experience any judgment or any certainly any discrimination based on that, but I can absolutely see how you could, and how it might happen. But I never came to it inauthentically. And so I never had a fear. I never had an imposter syndrome that was boiling inside of me, but I didn't feel like I was entitled to listen to it, right? Because I wasn't of that community or of that culture. It just felt authentic because it was something that I was interested in, and I wasn't trying to make anything more than it was.
Yes, yes,
Resonated, yeah.
yes. And I love how you use the word eclectic. So as I'm listening to you, I'm beginning to see how that word applies more and more to who you are as a human being. You talked about your mother raising you up in this sort of more human-centered type of childhood and everything. And I hear that as you're talking and sharing about some of the realities of your life and everything. So what I'd like to do is kind of switch the conversation up again and talk about what are some of those things that were values that your mom taught you that are very apparent in who you are as an adult, and maybe even thinking about some of those values that you're using in raising up your own children. I mean, you talked about your 5-year-old that kind of got this rap thing going on and all of that. So talk about it from a values perspective and how those values shape you and how you're now shaping your children.
Certainly. So yeah, my youngest son is he's got an entertainer gene in him. He's got this comfort of dancing and singing and performing, and mostly just family. And sometimes he'll get a little shy about it, but he's got a great personality. They all do, and he's got confidence for days. So I would, I guess, from a value perspective, the golden rule, I think, is the easiest way for me to describe it, right? And I think that comes from my mom's focus in undergrad on child development, and choosing to pursue that clinical care future profession, and wanting to treat others in the way that you're being treated. I think I was 5, maybe 6, and my sister and I were wrestling over a toy. Something happened, and one thing led to another. My sister got injured. It was a little toy that kind of hit her in the eye, and my mom said, "Listen, I told you needed to stop doing this. You didn't stop doing this. You're gonna have to go to the doctor, to the hospital, wherever we're gonna go, and you're gonna be there with her, and you're gonna see and experience from your side what she's gonna go through to make sure that she's okay." And it wasn't, we're gonna take your toys and you're not gonna play with these for 2 weeks. It was, we talked about, what this meant and why I didn't want you guys to be doing this. You did it. You made that choice. She got hurt. Thankfully, it's not worse. But what you need to learn is now what she has to go through in order to get better, right? Back to where it was. And that's something that I carry with me in terms of my children, my sons. They're going to roughhouse. I enjoy that with them, right? That's one of the ways that we show love and affection for each other, is that ability to play together in that physical way. But there are lines, and when we cross those lines, people can get hurt and people can get injured. And as my sons get older, they're learning the ability for words to hurt as much, if not more, than fists and hands and feet, and throwing a brother into the wall or a couch And so we're having a lot of those lessons about being just as careful with your words and how you choose to talk to somebody, whether they're your brother, your neighbor, your friend from school, whomever it is. Your words matter, and you're entitled to feel what you feel. You're entitled to, express those feelings, but you also don't have the right to intentionally harm somebody else with your words to make yourself feel better or to retaliate.
Yes. Yes.
That's 100% from my mother.
Yes. Yes. So Gail, what's your response to that?
Many times we would have talks and conversations about that, and I think it's a really crucial value that, and is taught them that you have a right to every feeling and thought you have. It's what we do with them that can be either respectful or disrespectful, can be hurtful or healing. And so he's teaching his kids that. That's something I've believed in since I've been young, since I was a child.
My oldest really enjoys being able to film play and creative things that they're doing in the house or in the yard with brothers or the neighbor friends in the neighborhood crew here. And sometimes I get frustrated because I want him to just experience it, just be in the moment and not try to film everything. And I think while he's gotten much better over the years, right? That exposure, that experience, that's going to happen. I don't want to take something away from him that's a passion, but I also want him to be able to just live in the moment and be able to experience it. And I think one of the things that he's started to do, which is some of just where he is developmentally in his age and also a little bit of his personality, is try to dictate and script kind of how the games and things of the creative play that they're going to have go. And his friends or his brothers are starting to push back on that because they don't want to do it that specific way. And so another thing that I would say, maybe it's talking around it as a value. I don't know the right way to succinctly say it's a value, but there's really something to learn in this life about, is it more important to you that this happens your way? Or is it more important to you that it happens and that you do this together in whatever that is, right? There's I will not quote whoever said it correctly, so I won't try, but it's the phrase, if you want to go fast, go alone, and if you want to go far, go together. And so I think there's an element to that I really believe in the power of collaboration and that mutual respect, like my mom said, right? You can feel what you feel, you can think what you think. It's what you choose to do with those things that determines the path forward.
Excellent. And so now that we're kind of on this topic of values, and if you think about how values relate to the topic of equity and can relate to the topic of anti-racism, can you talk about how your values that you've been raised on? So when you think about a generational, your mom was a certain way and she raised you up to be a certain way, passing along those values to you, and then you're now passing those values on to your children. Can you talk about how some of that also shows up in your workplace? And you might want to maybe describe for the audience what kind of work you do, but I'm interested in you talking about your values through that lens of equity and anti-racism, and how does this show up in your workplace?
Sure. I work in a construction trade association and represent contractors in a lot of different facets. I'm not alone. We've got a phenomenal team that I get to work with, and a board of directors that I get to work for and with, and we've got great contractors. But Western Pennsylvania as a region, one, and our construction industry as a subset of that, two, are not very diverse. We're just not. We would like for it to be more diverse. We can't manufacture that diversity. We've got a population challenge that we're facing, right, in terms of aging population and lack of new individuals of whatever categories they fit into, right, coming into the area. So we've got those challenges that are well beyond just our desires to improve those underrepresented people within our industry, right? I'm a firm believer that a career in construction can be just that. It's not just a job. You don't just get to go to work on one project and then that's it. It can be a really family sustaining, fulfilling career, community impacting career. And I think a lot of our intentions over the last 5 years have been in the right place. It's just really hard to make meaningful strides the way we would like to see sort of overnight success, right? There's a data challenge that we face. There's also a cultural challenge that we face. And I think that's an element that in many ways is just as difficult to overcome as the data, right? If there are X number of women that are capable of working in construction, have the aptitude and can get access to those opportunities, right? That's the pool. And just because we would like to have more women, as an example, in construction, that's the pool that we have to work with right now. And so how do we then attract, whether it's women or whether it's individuals of color or from an immigration standpoint, right? How do we bring more people in so that we can have better representation within the industry? They're just really full and I think can be optimistic efforts, but they're also really challenging. And that doesn't address even just then the cultural piece, which is if you work really hard to recruit underrepresented people into any industry, but the culture isn't there to meet that, if they don't feel welcome, if they don't feel included. And in many ways, I've learned over the last couple of years as we've focused more on this, things that just I would never think of. I had a great conversation with a Black executive not in our industry, but he talked about they've recruited really successful, not even C-level candidates, C-suite candidates, but management type candidates from other metropolitan markets who were identified as Black or they were people of color. And within 6 to 12 months, because there was a lack of community feeling and lack of connection for their family, their partners, their kids, they didn't feel comfortable staying here long term. And so those are far bigger issues than just what we're looking at from an intentional way to try to recruit and retain more diverse individuals in our industry. But it is something that's really important, and I'm glad, I'm proud that we're looking at that. I know this conversation is focused on the racial piece, but given what my mom's career has been and where I ended up choosing to get my undergraduate degree in psychology, I would also be remiss if I didn't say I'm really proud of our focus on mental health and wellness, and knowing that that's a challenge as well. I know it's kind of difficult. We talk about all the time of we're trying to bring more people in, but we also need to be honest and transparent about the fact that stress is real, and we're trying to help find ways to help people manage that stress and resources to connect with, so that we take a meaningful step towards changing the data. And the data is very scary in terms of how many people in our construction industry across America make that ultimate permanent choice to what could be a temporary challenge in their life. And so that's something else that I'm really proud that we as an industry and that my organization and our team get to try to work on.
Well, that's excellent. Excellent. I happen to be an on-call facilitator for the Center for Creative Leadership. And that's one of the things that's kind of embedded in their conversations about equity, diversity, and inclusion is this idea of psychological safety within that environment, within that becomes a part of the culture of that organization, so that people can feel if there is an issue or a problem that they can, that issue or that problem can be confronted and managed in a way that makes them feel safe and accepted within the confines of that space. So that idea, I love the way you just described that, because you're literally describing psychological safety and how important that is in the workplace for people to really be able to feel that equity really is there, that diversity is there, and that inclusion is actually there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's excellent.
Yeah, Gail, Mavis?
Yeah, that's excellent. I'm yeah, because it's so important. We are wired to seek feeling safe, right? And when we don't feel safe, it affects our whole being and our relationships and not just our mind and our belief systems. And so it's really important that I'm really glad to hear that you've been working hard doing that and trying to really work at finding ways, to increase, the comfort of others, of feeling safe. Yeah.
The access to resources and training. And again, it's that, there has to be the environment where they know that they can work hard, but to achieve all of the things that are possible. Otherwise, it's another opportunity that feels too good to be true because they don't feel like they can actually attain it.
Right.
Yeah, I was struck by your mentioning community and the idea of trying to have a diverse staff when you don't have a diverse population. And so if you bring people in from other geographic regions, let's say, how what's that like for them to grow into the position? When you were talking about the data is scary, were you referring to retention, people really being able to stay and make a career out of it? Or what were you referring to?
So I think I referenced data twice. The first time was more around the underrepresented groups within construction. So again, if that's people that identify as female or persons of color, one of the largest growing group, demographically speaking, in our area are people of Hispanic identification, and so we've tried to partner with Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and other groups that are connected within those communities to talk about ways that we can understand how to connect better with them to both help the existing workforce, when ultimately we hope we're able to bring more of those individuals who are interested in construction and having a career therein, so that there isn't a communication, a culture, a shared sort of time together working in that team environment to build something amazing. We want to make sure that there isn't an unnecessary hurdle if we're successful and able to create opportunities for them. The scary part, Mavis, I think, was I don't want to get into the details of it, but from a construction industry standpoint, I think the most recent data year was 2019 or 2019. There were about, I'll use round numbers, around 1,000 fatalities related to construction activity, slips, falls, struck by events, et cetera. And we focused for so long on the physical safety and the mechanisms to keep people safe and the training and awareness. And in the same year, there were a little over 5,000 individuals who work in construction who took their own lives. Now that includes overdoses and whether those were intentional or not, but that's 5 times the number of individuals. And we focus so much on the physical safety that I'm proud that we're starting to focus on, the mental side of it, the health and wellness side of it as well.
Yeah, it seems like you're uniquely qualified for that role.
I don't know that I'm uniquely qualified, but I am fortunate that I am uniquely positioned to be able to help encourage good work by a lot of people, not just us.
And just quickly, I was just thinking about not having the level of diversity that you would like. Do you find that you learn a lot from the people who come from other ethnic groups, racial groups? Do they bring their input into the community? For example, I would not want to live in a house that's this way, or if I were working here, I would put the door here, things like that, where they're really bringing cultural input to the construction work they do. Obviously, I don't know too much about your work, so that question might be a kindergarten question, but how does that come back to you, that diversity?
So I think the way that I can answer your question is unfortunately not maybe as specifically as you phrased it, but I would say what I've learned from adding some diversity within our own team at our organization, is those honest conversations come when you can build that trust, right? There's honesty, I believe, from day one. Otherwise, you wouldn't want to have that person working with you, right? But there's a deeper conversation that can happen around topics when you have that comfort and that trust. And I think that in some ways could be magnified when you're talking about a production-oriented team that's working to build something or an aspect of something, right? And so that's been my experience around it. That I think that's in part why I said earlier that I think it's not just the outreach and the recruiting piece, but it's got to be that cultural training and understanding. Otherwise, there's not going to be a positive.
A two-way exchange.
Yes.
Is that where you're going? Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Excellent. And we are nearly out of time. So Dave, if you could just throw out there, what is that final thing that you want the audience to walk away with? We literally have about 2 minutes to go. So what is that final thing that you want to, that final message that you want to leave with our audience?
Sure. I think I appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk with you three. And I hope what I've had to share about my experiences or my perspective will resonate with you all, with the work that you're doing and with the audience as they've followed you on this journey and are identifying ways that they can learn. I think it is not surprising to anybody that knows me and also has an opportunity to know my mom. I am the way I am, in large part due to who she is and how she raised us. And I take great pride in that. And
excellent.
There's constant learning and constant work to be done. And I hope I learn something new every day. But I'm very appreciative of the opportunities that I've had and the circumstance in which I was, have had my life.
All right. Thank you so much, Dave. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your life with us and your mom and all those experiences and everything. So I want to just leave our audience with this closing quote. The body knows that silence kills. When the silence is broken, the body may be restored and the body politic may be open to new possibility. And this is a quote from Walter Brueggemann. I believe it's a book, Mavis, entitled Interpreting Silence, God's Command to Speak Out.
Command. Yeah. God's command to speak out. Right.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. And so I leave that quote because whenever we're ending the show, I always end up with a quote that relates it back to why we do this show. And it's all related to the Cairo question. And as always, the final question is, what will you do to ensure that children have the right to freely and peacefully exist in the skin in which they were born? So I want to thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you the next time at Inflection Point Podcast here on Transformation Talk Radio. We're here every first and third Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific time and 6 p.m. Eastern time, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you for listening to Inflection Point Podcast, where our mantra is cultivating change from the inside out. The journey towards anti-racism and social change doesn't stop here. Truth, reconciliation, and healing come from ongoing, open, honest, and deliberate conversations. Continue to dive in and deconstruct your thoughts, ideas, and beliefs as we band together to manifest social change. Tune in to Inflection Point Podcast every first and third Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, here on TransformationTalkRadio.com for more conversations about how we can cultivate change from the inside out.